Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar of the series Biodiversity Conversations, India's Opportunities and Challenges. These webinars focus on various aspects of the national mission on biodiversity and human well-being. These webinar series are co-organized by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, the National Biodiversity Authority, and the Biodiversity Collaborative. My name is Ravikant, and I'm a senior faculty at A3 and also part of the Biodiversity Collaborative. I've been working in the last 2 decades on sustainable utilization and conservation of forest genetic resources. For today's discussion, we are discussing on the topic biodiversity-based livelihood programs, especially in agriculture, promises and prospects in India. I'm delighted that we have a diverse and wonderful set of people who will share their knowledge and experiences with us. So before I introduce them, I have a few announcements to make. So since we have already received a large number of questions by email, and I still welcome additional questions during this webinar, please use only the question and answer facility to ask questions to the panelists. Questions that are not answered during the webinar due to shortage of time will be answered via email, and you can write to us at contact@biodiversitycollaborative.org. And questions can be asked even anonymously if you wish to not to disclose your name. But we encourage all of you to include your email ID while sending your questions, so that we will be able to get back to you later in case your question has not been answered during the webinar. This webinar is also being streamed live on our Facebook page, Biodiversity Collaborative, and the recording of this webinar will also be uploaded soon on our YouTube channel, Biodiversity Collaborative. We especially like to thank and acknowledge the support we have received from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India for conducting these webinars. During this webinar, the chat function and raise your hand facilities will be disabled. I request you to use only the question and answer function to send your questions. In case there are any disruptions due to slow internet or power breakdown, we request all of you to please be patient, and we will do our best to restore and resume quickly. Okay, with that, I would like to give a brief overview of the mission in general, and then agriculture program in particular, and then we will go ahead and have the discussions with other panelists. Hope you're able to see my screen. Yeah. So the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-Being is one of the 9 mission programs approved by the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council. In this mission, in this national mission, we have about 7 different subcomponents, starting from cataloging and mapping life of India to biodiversity and ecosystem services. The third component being biodiversity, climate change and disaster risk management. The fourth component is on biodiversity and agriculture. The fifth component is subdivided into 2 components, subcomponents. One is on One Health and Zoonosis. The second one deals with medicinal plants and health security. The sixth component is on biodiversity and bioeconomy, and the seventh component is on biodiversity, capacity building and outreach. The mission overall aims to strengthen the science of restoring and conserving India's natural heritage and embed in it the biodiversity as a key consideration in all the development programs. For today's webinar, I will discuss more on the fourth subcomponent, that is biodiversity and agriculture. The mission of biodiversity, agriculture and nutritional security is to towards sustainable use of biodiversity in enhancing agricultural productivity, meeting food and nutritional security, and in ensuring income of rural households by incorporating rigorous biodiversity science-based models. So as we all know, biodiversity has been contributing significantly to agricultural productivity, whether it be in terms of the number of pollinators that actually pollinate. Almost 35% of all horticultural crops, as well as the number of birds, raptors, owls, and other reptiles that help in controlling the rodent population, which actually cause almost 15 to 20% havoc in the grain yield, especially and about 25% post harvest yield is damaged by the rodents. And the birds and owls and reptiles help manage the rodent population. In fact, it is estimated that one single owl in a 1 year can consume almost about 1,000 rats in a year. And apart from they being playing a major role in rodent control, a number of biodiversity elements help manage the pest problem in agriculture. Amphibians, reptiles, and also birds also consume large number of insect species, which sometimes cause a severe havoc in agricultural crops. Apart from these biodiversity elements, there are a number of other elements that are there underground, especially millipedes and other invertebrates that actually help in nutrient recycling and also making available nutrients. For example, we have a number of microbiota, both plant microbiota and soil microbiota, that help in making nutrient available to the plants, whether it may be nitrogen fixing or phosphorus solubility, or in actually providing plants both biotic and abiotic stress tolerance. So all these comprise the biodiversity, which help in increasing the productivity of our agriculture and horticultural crops. Besides this, the biodiversity is also important as it provides nutritional security, especially during times of distress, especially during periods when the rains fail, especially to the small and medium scale farmers, where a number of biodiversity elements such as bamboo, for example, or cultivated wild vegetables or wild plants that provide nutrition security to small and medium farmers. Besides that, the biodiversity is also important for providing livelihoods for a large number of people, both farmers as well as other forest dwelling communities across the country. But in this mission on agriculture, we know that biodiversity can enhance agriculture productivity through many direct and indirect paths. However, in the last few years, agricultural intensification has actually reduced this biodiversity around us. And the methods to quantify the role of biodiversity in enhancing agricultural productivity as well as in food security has not been well developed. And therefore, since it is not developed, we have not been able to document the impact of or the benefits of biodiversity to agricultural productivity. And efforts to mainstream the sustainable use of biodiversity in enhancing rural incomes has also been lacking. So in this component on biodiversity, agriculture, and nutrition security, we have about 5 subcomponents, from of biodiversity in enhancing agricultural productivity, and to see that biodiversity and how biodiversity can help in providing food and nutrition security, and also in conserving and diversifying our agrobiodiversity. I'll come to each one of these in a briefly. So the first component on developing methodology to quantify the contribution of biodiversity in agro-ecosystems. In this subcomponent, the plan is to identify the various networks and flows, and develop methodology to quantify the role of biodiversity in enhancing agricultural productivity. We also plan to develop estimates of the contribution of biodiversity to India's food and nutrition security, as well as to agricultural productivity. And based on all this, we intend to develop a roadmap for biodiversity-based models for enhancing agricultural productivity. And the second objective, as I mentioned already, we know that biodiversity in and around farms has been a major contributor to agricultural productivity. So in this objective, we plan to map the biodiversity in and around farms and assess the role of pollinators, biocontrol agents, as well as soil microbes on how these contribute to agricultural productivity as well as nutritional security. We also plan to document traditional knowledge and practices that are adopted by a number of communities in preserving these biodiversity elements. We also we also intend to study the influence of biodiversity in and around aquatic ecosystems, so not just on farmlands, but also the aquatic ecosystem, and based on all this, to develop a roadmap for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for enhancing agricultural productivity. The third component is on looking at biodiversity and food and nutritional security. In this, we plan to explore how the potential of underexploited crop plants in providing food and nutritional security, and undertake targeted improvement programs for such crops. We also intend to assess the role of wild edible leafy fruit and tuber species in contributing to food and nutrition security and to promote their domestication. We also intend to demonstrate the role of microbial, especially mushrooms and other resources such as lichens, ferns, etc., in meeting livelihood and nutritional security, and assess the contribution of wild animal resources, especially shells, snails, fish, insects, rodents, etc., in meeting nutritional and food security. And the fourth objective is to characterize and conserve genetic resources of important crop plants and their use in developing improved varieties, to characterize and conserve animal and fish genetic resources and explore their use in genetic improvement programs, as well as to promote in situ conservation of selected crop species, land races, and other wild crop relatives of crop plants. The fifth objective deals with livelihood opportunities based on biodiversity elements. And in this, we intend to work on to see how we can augment the livelihood of rural livelihoods through value addition of bioresources, resource enrichment on farms through high-value agroforestry tree species for enhancing livelihoods, to promote inland fishery and aquaculture-based livelihood opportunities, and to develop micros and small and medium-scale enterprise platforms on a sustainable basis based on market demand for biodiversity-based products. So all these, whatever I have been listed, are going to be accomplished by a large number of institutes, networked institutes. And we have, right now, we have listed about 50 to 60 institutes, which are going to be part of this large scale program in this mission. And there will be more than 200 scientists working together from diverse backgrounds, from agronomists to entomologists to pathologists to soil microbiologists to food technologists to economists to statisticians. So it's going to be an interdisciplinary workforce that's going to address these challenges. And the overarching outcome and impact would be to change the current perception of biodiversity and its contribution to agriculture, and also to develop regional and national level policies that incorporate biodiversity-based models in production systems. We also intend to prospect for conserving biodiversity in our own farms and develop novel and unconventional ways in which bioresources could diversify livelihood opportunities and thereby enhance rural incomes. So coming back to biodiversity-based livelihood programs as today's topic. So we have for the first speaker today, Dr. Vasudev, who is professor and head of Department of Forest Biology from the Forestry College, UAS Dharwad. He is he has been working in Forestry College Sirsi for more than 2.5 decades, and has been also a member of the Western Ghats Task Force on Conservation, and he also represented, he has been a member of the Appraisal Committee of MOECC. So and today he'll be talking about the role of biodiversity in meeting rural livelihood challenges. So over to Dr. Vasudev, sir. So welcome, and then please, you can share your screen now.
Vasu, unmute your audio.
Yeah. Are you seeing the screen now? Okay. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank Professor Bawa and Professor Uma Shankar for the spearheading the biodiversity science in India. I would also like to thank Dr. Ravi Chalam and Dr. Ravi for giving me opportunity to share my thoughts on role of biodiversity in meeting rural livelihoods in the Western Ghats agro-ecosystems. I am Professor Vasudeva. I come from College of Forestry, Sirsi. Sirsi is located right here What you're seeing in the background is the river valley, the Sharavati River Valley, which is around 40-50 kilometers from my institute, located right in the Western Ghats. As we know, Western Ghats is the one among world's 8 hottest hotspots of diversity, and it is a region with outstanding universal value for biological diversity. It's also a UNESCO Natural Heritage Site. The most important thing about the Western Ghats is the human presence and the rich agriculture practice that is being practiced here. So all this milieu, what does it mean to a rural livelihood? Let us dive little deeper into this and flag some issues. If you look at the landscape of Western Ghats, it is a huge mosaic of patches of agricultural lands and forests. And obviously people depend on wild resources such as the tropical fruits, which are very important for their livelihood. In fact, the diversity in and around these agro-ecosystems in the Western Ghats contribute to the sustainable livelihood in the following 4 ways. Number one is that, as Ravi already mentioned, it is the basis for sustainable food production and livelihood system. It contributes to the nutrition and other livelihood needs. It contributes to the wild relatives to improve yields and traditional varieties. And finally, it contributes to the in fact, if you look at the Western Ghats, it's a very rich repository of wild edible fruits. A recent report says that there are 237 wild edible fruit species found in the Western Ghats. Apart from that, you have 200 undomesticated vegetables and the forest food species. They are extraordinarily valuable resources. Communities in and around Western Ghats plant them, harvest them, both from the wild and the semi-domesticated fruit trees, which is a source of sustainable and naturally biofortified diets. It's also an important source of income to the rural households. It provides most important genetic resources and provider of ecosystem services. We conducted a small study to look at what is the contribution of a small segment of the biological resources in the form of tropical fruit tree diversity to the household income in Uttara Kannada district. The district was divided into 3 regions: a coastal region, Upper Ghat region, and the Eastern Plain. And in each of them, we looked at, we went to the households and looked at what is the percentage of income that is contributed by harvesting wild fruit tree resources. As you can see here, the percentage can vary from anywhere between 2 to 8%. What was more amazing was there was a correlation or association between the diversity of the tropical fruit tree species and its contribution to the household income, which was positive. So likewise, we may have several of such stories to tell in the Western Ghats. We picked up one of the particular resource called the wild pickled mango, which is economically most important and livelihood component of the biodiversity here in the Western Ghats. It is harvested from the wild, as you can see here, and then pickles are made, and then every single meal of the local community is not complete without these aromatic, beautiful pickles. And they're semi-domesticated in the home gardens. They're so beautiful, aromatic, I may not be able to tell you how good it is, except to show you this. Once you take the aroma, this is what you feel after taking this aroma. We documented more than 500 land races of this aromatic pickled mango. And then we, using a participatory approach, we identified very important varieties which are important for the livelihood. We developed a community biodiversity register for all the most of the tropical fruit tree species around the Central Western Ghats. And in the mean, we also identified custodians of genetic diversity. These custodians are nothing but the men and women who actively maintain, adapt, disseminate the agricultural biodiversity related knowledge over time. And in fact, they have also been recognized by the community members as the custodians on having the knowledge on diversity. And using them, we established community nurseries. About 20 community nurseries have been established all over around this city area, which actually help increase the access for farmers for useful germplasm. And they prepared grafts of very useful undomesticated and semi-domesticated fruit crops and developed a huge number of saplings. In fact, we bought all these and then distributed these grafted saplings of the tropical fruit tree species to the households, more than 1,000 households belonging to 70 villages, and something like around 65 native varieties were actually distributed. This is perhaps the largest kind of a work that has been undertaken for the native species of the tropical tree species. Likewise, if you look at the Western Ghats, there are more than 200 species of such fruit tree species which have stories to tell. This is 12 species of Garcinia having the distribution right from Gujarat to Kerala, and each one of them have a very good potentiality to augment the livelihood of the rural folk. Let me flag two more issues before I close. The second issue is with respect to how the agriculturally important biodiversity can actually be important, make important contributions to the nutrition security. This is Garcinia indica, popularly known as kokum, and it's a very good beverage making fruit. And then we, in the course of last 1.5 decades, have identified 4 different varieties of it. It's a morphotype, red morphotype, green, orange, and the yellow morphotypes. With the help of the DRDO lab in Mysore, we also estimated the nutrition potentiality. As you can see here, the ascorbic acid content in the red morph is extremely high, which is almost 15 times higher than the vitamin C that is provided by the oranges. Look at the irony. If half a dozen species of this Garcinia is grown in every school, and then if the students are made to drink the beverage that is coming out of it, we can achieve nutrition security, as well as we can now conserve these rare varieties. However, there is no such program right now to mainstream that. We are now looking at it as an important opportunity. So Garcinia, just like Garcinia indica, though it is popular, it is extremely poorly studied for their nutritional potentiality. The last thing that I would like to flag is what is the contributions of the agriculturally important diversity to the ecosystem services. And this takes us to another district called Kodagu, popularly known as Cool, in the Western Ghats. My student, Dr. Maheshwarappa, has done this work. He divided the entire Coop district into 3 zones. Zone 1, which is having a lot of evergreen forest. Zone 2 is a transition 1, and Zone 3 is deciduous 1. He simply went to 3 different landscape elements like the natural forest, the sacred groves, and the shade coffee area, and then looked at what is the tree richness that is there, that is the richness index, and how much is the carbon that is captured in that. As you see here, in this particular work, the shade coffee has not been included. The stems of the shade coffee has not been included. Only the native species have been considered. Despite that, shade coffee landscapes with the native tree species are as good as natural forests, sometimes better than the natural forest, both in terms of the tree richness and important ecosystem service like the carbon density capturing. So this is where we should now start documenting such contributions of the agriculturally important landscapes to the biodiversity. And in conclusion, biodiversity on farm and associated with the agricultural systems are important contributors to the livelihood. They contribute cash income to the nutrition as well as to the ecosystem services. There are hundreds of such systems in which the rural peoples are deriving enhancement of the livelihood, but it's fast depleting, maybe because of the apathy, and we know more about colas than not the co-coms. So now there is an opportunity to mainstream their contributions through targeted interventions. That's where the biodiversity mission has a great role to play. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. And now I request Dr. K.S. Murli, who is the Executive Director of MSSRF Chennai, to talk about harnessing local biodiversity for nutritional security and empowering livelihoods. Dr. Murli has over 3 decades of work in water, climate change, adaptation, biodiversity and conservation, as well as in forestry and the development sector. He has supported the Government of India in submitting reports to the CBD and UNCCD and has been recognized as a South Asia Regional Biodiversity Expert for USAID and Asia Regional Expert at IUCN for non-timber forest products. Dr. Murli will talk about harnessing local biodiversity for meeting nutritional security. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you can now see the screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Vasu. I think you set a very nice tone for this discussion, which I am going to have. Although I am quite new here, just less than 2 months since I started as Executive Director here, but I try to pick up on various aspects that MS Swaminathan Foundation is doing on enriching agriculture for nutrition aspects of it. Although I have said a little bit differently, but the core of what the title that you suggested does not matter here. It's the same thing. So I kept it as it is. So, you know, nutrition, if you look at the sustainable goals, SDGs, it covers number 2, SDG goal number 2, zero hunger, which says end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. You can see that 53% of women between 15 and 49 years are anemic. Vasu comes from a very rich, area where there is absolutely no problem of water, no problem of biodiversity at tree level and even at the crop level. But what I'll take you through is a different areas, which is primarily devoid of many such facilities that Vasu has been. But our efforts are primarily added through various like gardens, etc., gardens for biofortified plants and also gardens for nutritive plants that are there. So this will be my presentation on various programs that we have had in MS Swaminathan Foundation. The strategy is that food-based approach to eradicate malnutrition and bringing nutrition focus to farming systems. This is primarily to improve the dietary habit of the people rather than, putting just tablets of different kinds. The idea is that they eat more types of fruit to food to have nutrition. And there is another issue, but people may or may not know about it. When you take tablets of different kinds or drink several, tonics, the nutrients available may not be bioavailable. I mean, they may not be used by the body in required quantities, and therefore it is more a wastage than utilization. Whereas if you take as a food, then it will have a lot of bioavailability, and also it is digested within the human systems. And that's why we followed the food-based approach to eradicate malnutrition rather than employing to the other things. This not only enhances the diversity of food within a farm and also improves livelihoods of the people who are particularly small and marginal farmers. This approach is expected to provide multiple benefits, including bridging disconnect between agriculture and nutrition. This has been a major issue that for almost 10 years, not only our institution, but globally, we are also addressing. So there is a pure disconnect between agriculture and nutrition. Our idea is to bring agriculture and nutrition together so that there is diversity of plants in the farm as well as diversity of food on the plate. That's our motto. And bringing about nutritionally important crops to the farm and creating awareness. I think the problem in the last 20, 30 years is to grow rather than eat properly. So that is where we are bringing a change in terms of how nutritive food should be eaten and how it should be grown in the first place. And then that is translated to the food plate on the dinner table. Consumption of nutritive and balanced diet by the people and leading towards healthy society. That's the more or less goal that our mission that we are undertaking at this moment. That's why we invented a system called farming system for nutrition, which is local specific. It cannot be replicated elsewhere. It has to be very, very local, and what is locally available needs to be grown and consumed. And whatever the resource that are there specifically in that environment needs to be provided to the families who are there, which provides better nutrition. For example, if I bring something from Western Ghats to Eastern Ghats and try to provide, although it may be nutritive, but it may not be available in that condition to the human health. So it is better always to use locally available resources to enhance nutrition food in one's plate. Our approach is primarily key focus areas, developing and demonstrating local specific farming system for nutrition. We approach through what we call as KVKs, Krishi Vignan Kendras. These are all small research institutions or extension institutions with respect to the governmental program extensions. We use them to bring this model into to elaborate on this model. We primarily established Nutri-rich gardens in KVKs so that the people who come there can understand what are all the best nutrition available in these locally available plants, and they can grow it in their home gardens or within their lands. Creating a cadre of community hunger fighters. This is an idea which we started primarily with the women. We have if you teach a woman, the family will grow, and the entire family becomes aware. That is our notion, and therefore we trained women particularly on nutrition-rich as hunger fighters who would go in each village to each house, and they start making the people in various houses aware that what are the best nutrition plants that are available within the locality and what should be done, how should it be consumed, etc. And also policy advocacy with evidences from the above research. You can see the number of species available within our reach. This is not something that none of these are mostly alien to that given region. So these are all the fruits and vegetables and even grains that can be consumed. And this is our model wherein we not only genetic garden where we have naturally available plants, we also plant them with biofortified plants so that there will be, the people can take it up whenever they want to their houses or to their home gardens or to their farms. We are primarily partnering with families at the local level, district administration or local administration, sometimes state agricultural universities, and most importantly, Krishi Vignan Kendras, which are local research institutions through agricultural universities or government extension. And of course, we also, partnered with various like-minded agencies. Primarily, we have to do this to mobilize farmer groups, SHGs, that is self-help groups, build capacity at the KVKs and also at the village level. And primarily, we supply quality planting material for nutri-rich plants in the farmers so that they can grow on their own various nutri-rich plants in their gardens. So there are several edible plants that serve as the largest supplier of human nutritive elements. And there are what we have is not naturally nutri-dense plants like Moringa, Sesbania, which are locally available. People always be using, but over a period of time, there has been a reduced use of these Moringa and Sesbania. And in fact, they have lots of cultural value. In certain days in a month, we use, for example, Sesbania. Uh, similarly, Moringa and other species. So we are bringing back those species so that they can also culturally acceptable, which are already there as a part of the culture, but now it is more that they are available in their own garden. And we also encourage biofortified crops, which have traditional, through traditional breeding, not other means of breeding, so that, for example, pearl millet has very rich iron, zinc, zinc-rich rice, etc. These are all given. There are various, even rice species, which are very rich in nutrients, but we simply don't know. This awareness is being created so that nutrition is imparted into the human health. So we are primarily containing nutrients, plants which are containing nutrient dense edible parts, but lowest amount of calories. That is our motto. They have more nutrients rather than calories. That is an idea. See, for example, these two species I talked about, Moringa, which is on your left, or maybe right, I don't recall how you look at it, and Sesbania. These two are, as you can see, they are 25 times rich in spinach. 25 times more of iron than spinach that we normally eat, and 17 times more calcium than milk, 15 times more potassium than in banana, 10 times more vitamin A as in carrots, and 9 times more protein as of yogurt. So these are all the richness that we have in these two species. And they are locally available. You don't have to go looking for it. And these are all the kind of biofortified plants which we also introduced in these gardens so that the people can take it. So orange flesh sweet potato is far more rich in vitamin A and vitamin C. Similarly, there are black carrots, which are now local, available in the market, which is again rich in beta carotene, and there are many varieties that are bred specifically for beta carotene. You can see anthocyanin, which is pink radish. Similarly, papaya honeydew variety, which we all know it's from Coorg area, which Vasu talked about, which has high beta carotene again. So likewise, we have a lot of biofortified plants, crops which are found in the Nutri gardens. And we have established 4 big Nutri gardens, one in Palghar in Maharashtra, and one in Orissa, Jaipur. There is another in Uttar Pradesh in Kanpur, and Thrissur in Tamil Nadu. So these demonstrate in a large area how these Nutri gardens can enrich your nutrition on the plate. And people are welcome to take samples of these plants, and they can start growing in their home gardens. These are all the 4 different places where we have our Nutri gardens, as you can see in Palghar, Tirur, Kanpur, and Jaipur. Of course, Jaipur is our own office that we maintain this one. So compelling reasons for establishing genetic gardens is that these gardens have different sections, particularly on micronutrients and also various vitamins. So we have designated areas where you find vitamin D, vitamin B, vitamin C, etc., so that you can see among those plants what is available with you in your area, so that you can pick up and start eating. Similarly, gardens also will provide farmers the crops they can introduce in their farming system. We also supply seedlings or saplings or seeds, etc., so that they don't have to go looking for these plants. And mainstream nutrition in the farming system, it is important to promote nutrition literacy. Garden will also provide consumers a nutritive value of the crops. So we are trying to enhance diversity of crops within the farm. That is a farm system that we are trying to promote in various places that we are talking about, so that there is diversity on farm. The same diversity will lead to nutritive diversity on plate. And these are all some of the plants that we have demonstrated, and you can see people are visiting and taking lots of, you can see lots of seeds and also plant materials that is for propagation. the focus on FSN design, we also have designed how some of these plants can be grown. As you can see in one of the photographs, you have 3-4 crops grown in the same piece of land, like maize, like pearl millet, and bajra, etc. So these are all the things that we are now promoting in various areas within our own systems, as well as promoting them in various in adjoining areas. About nutrition, we are talking about nutrition, and also we are creating awareness across the board.
Yeah,
And and another two, I think I will finish. Okay. Key findings are that there is improved variety of package of practice, and as you can see, there is the diversity within the plate is what we expect people to eat. There is increased average intake, number of items, etc. So there is a greater understanding, that is at least 94% of the people understand this about nutrition, sensitive agriculture, which we promote. These are all some of the pictures. What we expect is these gardens are expected to provide a lot of nutritive plants to the people, and they aim to conserve at least 100 species level diversity with maximum genetic diversity within the agroecological zone. And there is, of course, increased awareness and also improving diversity, the undernourished farm households up to 60% on the basis level. Thank you.
Dr. Sarla Kaling is the Regional Director of Eastern Himalaya, Northeast India, and she's a biologist by training and works on conservation and sustainable utilization of crop resources, and also works between the interface of nature and human well-being. Sarla, over to you.
Very good afternoon to everybody. I would first of all like to express my gratitude for being invited to be part of this webinar. For the 5 minutes that I've been given, I will just walk you through the kind of biodiversity livelihoods in the Eastern Himalaya and what are the experiences that we have from Darjeeling, Himalaya, and how we are moving ahead. So this is the area where we are working, and most of the work that we've been doing for the past 2 decades or so are around 2 national parks, 2 protected areas, the Singalila National Park and the Sinchal Wildlife Sanctuary, in about 30 to 40 villages. So since I'm bringing you all to the context of the mountains, there are a few things that I would just like to mention over here very, very quickly. This may be unique for Darjeeling because half the area, about 22% of the area that we have other than forest and agriculture there's a lot of tea plantations, which is a monoculture. And then about 38% forest and agriculture. And therefore, most of the land holding is very small, as you can see. Most of it is 64% is marginal. So the livelihoods that we are talking about, biodiversity-based livelihoods, is, and if it's agriculture, it's done in land that is really, really very small. So very, very small parcels of land. But at the same time, if you look at some of the pictures over here, the landscape that I'm talking to you all about is a socio-ecological landscape. The farming system is still very, very integrated. So you have variety of crops, whether it's food crops, cash crops, then kitchen gardens, and then wild edibles, and very, very close to the forest patches, and a lot of dependence. And their dependence is, I mean, you cannot kind of remove the forest for these communities because it's so inextricably linked with their livelihoods. It's also an area I'll have to mention here, in the Himalayas, that it's got a lot of climate change and there are local impacts, as you can see, rainfall, hailstorms, frosts, and all these have been in the past 2-3 years. And They've really destroyed food crops as well as cash crops. So this is the context at which livelihood enhancement work is being done over here. Also at the same time, it's just that it's such a dynamic kind of times for us because things are changing. People are going from subsistence food crop agriculture to more cash crop agriculture, and there's a lot of migration, so there's remittance economy. And there is also a lot of opportunities provided by various government schemes as well as tourism, infrastructure development, and of course, there's a lot of change of aspiration of communities. And then we have COVID-19. So we have three main components on biodiversity-based livelihoods mainly. And of course, since it's an agrarian landscape, so agriculture does form a very important part of the landscape. And because these are small parcels of land, like I said, and because they are dependent on the forest and they're linked with the forest, so the work that we've been doing with them is more on sustainable agriculture, but also on agriculture that is climate smart. So managing your soil nutrition, soil moisture, using all kinds of local resources that is available over there to manage agriculture in these small farms, and also cash crops. We've been doing a lot of work on building institutions and also entrepreneurship, because the aspiration of the people is again to have income from agriculture. It's not just about subsistence. And therefore, building institutions and also training them for getting into agri-entrepreneurship becomes very important. So we've been doing work on that. At the same time, I think the great potential there is, and that experience tells us, is from also off-farm diversification, which is again related to biodiversity, which is apiary. We know from colleagues in the Western Ghats, there's a lot of work done on apiary and then huge volume of honey production. We may not have the volume, but there is a niche kind of a market for honey that is produced. So there is a great potential for that. And there's almost in the last, over the last 4 years, almost about 9-10 lakhs of rupees have been generated by the communities from all across our field sites by this apiary keeping. And then because the land size is so small, we have these polyhouse systems where they can grow cash crops, high value crops. And this also has a lot of dependence on the forest and on the biodiversity. And yes, rural tourism, because of the aesthetic value of the ecosystem around in the Himalayas. So a lot of potential, especially for rural tourism. And we are also, we have a very integrated approach. So we also, and energy is one of the most important things, energy access to clean energy, and also for turning it into a micro enterprise. So we've also been intervening in efficient energy technologies. The experience and potential is that even in agriculture, I think from what we've done from an input-based kind of a model, we've now moved on to more sustainability issues. And one of the main things in the mountains is, of course, building institutions. So we've been working very closely actually with NABARD. And so there is a lot of potential for doing these farmer-producer organizations, moving them into entrepreneurial level and linking to local markets, because I'll come back to that later, because we also experienced and learned that, linking to local markets is very important. If you look at all the supply chain linkages that we have, it's only to very distant markets. But COVID has also taught us that there is a very, very big potential of linking to local markets. And again, in off-farm diversification, we've been doing, again, work at the input level models. So even for apiary, for polyhouses, but we are now moving on more to, entrepreneurship, so group formation, institutional formation, and linking up, especially with MSME and Sfurti for entrepreneurship. And there are a lot of my people who have come back during COVID. So we've been linking up with them to do a lot of these market work. Some of them have come up with startups marketing startups and all that, and we are linking people with them. And there's a lot of potential for this kind of works. And I'm sure it's going to resonate with all the other listeners who are here and who are from the mountains or from the Northeast. And again, building energy technology is always there, but also how can we build micro enterprises out of these? Because heating is a problem in the mountains. We need the heat, we need space heating, and we are able, if we are able to diversify these energy efficient models into models that can be sold, or develop energy resources that can be used as enterprises, using the biomass from the forest, especially invasive species, I think it's got really great potential. We are also looking at agrobiodiversity right now, especially after COVID, a lot of, and we've been thinking before that because we've realized the loss of traditional crops, but with a great potential that traditional crops have in agro-entrepreneurship. Food systems, I think, is one of the biggest area that we can link with, because we have linked from the farm to the market, but we have a huge link from the farm to the table or to the plate that we need to do. And tourism plays a very, very important role in doing this. And it's a very great opportunity. With that, again, linked with food system, other than, of course, the nutritional security, wild edibles, medicinal plants, and crafts have also got a very huge potential for enhancing the livelihoods of local communities, even in terms of income or in terms of entrepreneurship. And training and skilling for all these things is what we continue to do. And also the changing the training and skilling according to the requirement and according to the change in strategy that we have also been taken. And I think one of the good things that we've been doing is working with the block development officers, especially, and where they have different sectors of resource persons, and basically using them for all our trainings. Present challenges that we have in biodiversity and livelihood is managing the aspiration of people, because most of the people have become very, very risk averse. Okay. They want quick, 2 minutes, 2 seconds, quick cash benefits, and a lot of them are out. And policy is one of the main, challenge over here, as well as climate. And in the end, of course, COVID, and now we need to think more about resilience and how do we deal with all these things in the new normal, because there are a lot of problems. And this is what is just 4 things have come out. I've just presented 4 things that have come out from a very, very short survey that we did. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarla. Thank you very much. And last speaker today is Dr. Renmar. Renmar is a research assistant professor in biology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and also director of programs at A3 Boston. He teaches courses on conservation biology and sustainability science, as well as on climate change, and has a rich experience in several mountain areas of the world. So for today's talk, he's going to talk on integrating biodiversity and agriculture and what are the major challenges in doing so. Welcome, Renmar, and please go ahead. Renmar,
thank you very much to everybody who's been arranging this webinar and who's listening. I really appreciate the chance to participate. Very interesting talks, and I'll basically be following up on what Dr. Sarla has said. She gave a very thorough overview of the programs that we've been working on in Darjeeling area and also in Sikkim. But I'd like to point out 1 or 2 things. One is that biodiversity and agriculture in many ways go together very, very smoothly. In some ways, however, they clash. And some elements of biodiversity we can describe as ecosystem disservices. These need to be controlled in order to facilitate full development of agricultural productivity. So in many of the most diversity-rich parts of the world, and this includes, of course, India, agriculture and protected areas in particular are managed by separate agencies and institutions. They often have conflicting goals, and they don't often share their data or collaborate on projects. And this institutional pattern makes it difficult to confront this particular problem that farmers all across the Himalayas have in common, and other parts of India, and really it's a global issue, which they consistently describe as the major obstacle to their livelihood security. And that is human-wildlife conflict, or HWC. By definition, HWC takes place just at the interface between agricultural production and wildlife. But these two sectors are managed by separate agencies. There are practical solutions available to farmers, but to implement them, the management of rural landscapes needs to become much more integrated across these sectors. Villages where we've been working are located just outside, as Dr. Sarla said, outside the borders of several high biodiversity protected areas. And these parks are most likely the principal source areas for populations of the major crop-raiding herbivores, including wild boar, barking deer, Himalayan porcupine, macaque, and black bear, the big five in human-wildlife conflict. In particular, I'll be focusing here on crop raiding rather than, there are carnivores, of course, as well, which present problems to some farmers, but the crop raiding at the lower elevations where we've been working, mid elevations, is the major issue that farmers face. Now, worldwide experience, as well as ecological theory, both make perfectly clear that in the absence of top predators or consistent human activities, herbivore populations will tend to increase. As interspecies resource competition intensifies, individuals will disperse out of their home areas. Some individuals, it may be just a few particularly risk-tolerant individuals, may become habituated to the high carbohydrate resources available to them in farm fields. So the question is, are herbivore populations dense inside the protected areas of the Eastern Himalaya? There have been a few small-scale studies that have been carried out in the region indicating that they probably are, but unfortunately we haven't received permission, HA hasn't received permission to undertake an exploratory study of the habitat occupancy inside the parks. This would be very useful in understanding the reported increase in crop raiding over time, because farmers are complaining about this very consistently. It's getting worse for them. In Darjeeling, however, we were able to do some limited camera trapping outside the reserved forests, in the reserved forests outside the parks. And we did come up with some indicative clips. This shows one of the fences put in by the forest department some time ago, and one of our projects has been to work on reinforcing and building up the fence with living bushes. This is a barking deer who doesn't seem to be intimidated by the presence of the fence at all. Likewise, at night, we've seen plenty of wild boar. This one didn't seem to notice the camera until he smelled it, and then he noticed it, and he didn't like the smell of humans. So let me just unshare for a moment. In focus group discussions, as well as in individual interviews, HWC is regularly cited as the major obstacle to livelihood security in rural Darjeeling district, and also in Sikkim, just to the north. Many villagers report that continued pressure from crop raiding was making it impossible for them to continue producing their crops commercially, and many are reducing their cropping activity and trying to get access to other livelihood activities, mostly casual daily wage labor in programs like MGNREGA and PGMSY. So I want to move ahead now to discussing we're still in the process of analyzing our data. We have multiple years of data at this point. on both human-wildlife conflict and, as Sadala said, on socioeconomic characteristics of 30 to 40 villages. So we're working through this very large amount of data. And one of the emerging characteristics of the two areas that we're working in is that here now I'm comparing one village from Singalila area and another village, Rajahata, from Central Wildlife Sanctuary. The average income in these two villages, which are comparable in many ways, about the same size, but the average income is very, very different. Gurdum people have about a third the annual income, as do folks in Rajahata. And this applies both to crops and to livestock income. And so we see that the total agricultural income is about a third in Gurdum as it is in Rajahata. So if we look at percentage of households with daily wage income outside agriculture, it's about the same amount, a large percentage, 80%, 80 to 82%. And similarly, percent of households with other sources of income besides daily wage, that could be remittance or government work. And then if we compare the losses to HWC, they're actually much greater, considerably greater in Central Wildlife Sanctuary area, which is interesting because it's closer to Darjeeling. And so the fact that it's much closer to the urban area explains most of these differences that we see here. And the fact that the agriculture focuses much more on vegetables and high value crops and less on the staples like potatoes, peas, and maize explains why the damage reported in Rajahata is considerably more than that in Gurdum. And here we have an example of the 18 community maps that we made. These show the each of the fields in this case in Gurdum, and the color indicates the vulnerable and less vulnerable households. Interestingly, the vulnerable households aren't necessarily on the edge of the village. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. And when we looked at when we compared HWC damage with income, we saw that in many cases the occupants had already partially given up agriculture, and so the households that were reporting the most damage were the ones that were also planting the most, and the ones that were reporting least, like this number 28 over here, had a much lower income and was going toward a daily wage income instead of depending on agriculture. So human-wildlife conflict is a major driver in changing people's livelihoods and in driving a movement toward urban areas and away from the village life. So if we want to continue to support people's livelihoods in rural areas, both agriculture and also non-farm activities need to be supported and are doing so. Niti Aayog has already published in recent years several documents indicating and advising that the government should be supporting both agricultural extension in marginal areas as like in Darjeeling Hills, and also supporting movement toward off-farm livelihood activities. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Renmar. Since we have received a large number of questions, I'll be only selecting few questions that will be answered live, and the rest of the questions will be typed, and the answers will be sent by email. So one of the questions is to Dr. Vasudev. How can existing institutions such as Biodiversity Monitoring Committee and PBR at Gram Panchayat and traditional knowledge and model technologies be used towards tapping the potential of uncultivated wild food as possible food resources? So,
okay, tapping the potential of uncultivated wild food is indeed a very challenging job. Basically, firstly is that there is a wide variability of wild food that is available, and it's quite endemic in terms of its spread. What we know in Uttarakhand may not be known in other districts, and the social acceptance of it actually. So it's a combining all these. It's quite a big challenge. In fact, many people know about coke than the kokum. That's the problem with us. So we need to now bring in some kind of a better awareness, and then that should happen as the question tells that there must be. It should stem from the grassroots level, and right from the grassroots level, we need to now make it aware. And very exemplary work that has been done by MSSRF is perhaps a very good eye opener. Thank you.
No, I'll just continue with you. There are a few more questions for Dr. Vasudev. Another one by Pranesh Badami. There are a couple of questions from him, and he asked, to what extent have these custodians benefited from the access and benefit sharing from the National Biodiversity Fund of the NBA, and also what are the provisions in ABS and how it has been effectively used.
Okay. The provisions of ABS are still in incipient stages, though there are hundreds of MOUs have been signed with the NBA. Secondly is that the concept of custodian farmers has not been mainstreamed. It's only occurring in the only little smaller area. So connecting the ABS benefit, reaching the custodian farmers would take a time. And with respect to, there is another question I also read about it with respect to the PPVFRA. PPVFRA is nothing but the plant protection of plant varieties and Farmers Act Authority. So there also there are the PPVFRA will actually look at agriculturally important diversity, whereas NBA looks at more natural, undomesticated, and the wild biodiversity and how the benefits can be shared. So while PPVFRA has certain mechanisms to award the individuals and give incentives to the farmer groups which actually take up these issues, while NBA has a mechanism of ABS. So perhaps these two would go a little longer, may take a little longer time to become more mainstream. And yeah, that will take some time.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And questions to Dr. Murli. How has commercial agriculture and biodiversity, how can commercial agriculture and biodiversity go hand in hand? Are there any success stories? And another question from Ananta Krishna is to how to balance agriculture practice and biodiversity, since we know that agricultural practices do not encourage biodiversity.
Actually, if I take the second question first and say that that is not true. The agriculture biodiversity, commercial agriculture and biodiversity. See, if you look at some of the agriculture that is followed in the northeastern region, for example, the entire northeast, not just one state, in 7 states, there is n number. In fact, I have worked in Nagaland, I have worked in Arunachal Pradesh, where in a small piece of 200, 300 hectares, you will get nearly 40, 50 species that are grown along with trees and along with shrubs. And even rice variety alone is to the tune of 30 to 50 different varieties. Rice alone, paddy alone. So in this context, I don't think we can say that so easily. And, but there is an angle of commercial. What is considered as commercial? If I were to put for example, 10 or 15 tree species in the same piece of land, half an acre or something like that, and still grow. In fact, my study shows that you will lose to the extent of 5% of 5 to 10% of the crop diversity within if agroforestry is followed. So 5 to 20% is not something great when from trees you are getting renewed economic benefits. So people have not really worked on that issue. In fact, what we are in the MSSRM is demonstrating that there are many plants that are grown in a season, single season. That's what I've showed you in the picture. That at least 4 to 5 species or crop plants can be grown, and still you can get equal amount of benefits. I don't say commercial benefits. Commercial benefits has lots of disadvantages. If there is one crop, one disease that comes or pest comes, the entire crop will be lost. But with 4 or 5 species, even it is very specific to the crop, it will not spread as much. So this has been even theoretically proved. So in that context, I don't agree with the argument that commercial agriculture does not, just we don't have that. Of course, in experimental stations, it isn't proven, but it has to be piloted and then replicated.
Yeah, thank you.
Best example is, I would say, let them go in thousands of hectares or thousands of kilometers of cultivation in Northeast, Zoom cultivation.
Yeah, and there are few people who want to establish agro-biodiversity gardens like the MSSRF model. So I'll ask them to contact you. First.
Sure. In fact, I saw one from Kerala.
In
Kerala, in Wayanad, we already have one system.
Okay.
They can really go to Wayanad, and I can give you the contacts in Wayanad, and they can get this information.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one question to Renmar. How the vulnerability was mapped in view of economy over to ecology or vice versa? I'm not able to understand the question, but anyway, if you have.
Could you repeat the question, please?
This is by Dr. Sunil Nautiyal. He asks, how was the vulnerability mapped?
Vulnerability.
To the.
At the household level. Well, yes, we basically compared the amount of damage from the human-wildlife conflict, the crop raiding, with the agricultural income over several years of data that we have, and we saw that the human-wildlife conflict could add up to almost everything that a farmer planted in one particular season. In other words, they would lose close to 80 to 90% of what they had planted. But that wasn't true of most houses. So it was variable, highly variable within villages and also among villages from village to village.
Okay, and there's another question is on how to improve the severe relation between the agriculture communities towards wildlife and also people giving up farming due to human-wildlife conflict. So how do you establish a severe relationship? How to reconcile between the wildlife?
Well, my hypothesis is that if the source populations of the crop-raiding species are coming from the parks, and the parks need to take that into account in their management of the park. And I think this is what's lacking. There's somewhat one could call it a benign neglect, a policy of benign neglect toward some of the larger parks. There isn't very much study of what's going on inside the park. And so I think it's quite possible, it's a very strong hypothesis, that the source populations are dispersing out into the agricultural areas around the park, outside the park, and so neither the revenue department nor the forest department are taking responsibility for that issue, and it's creating a major problem throughout the rural area, really.
Yeah, thank you.
The question was whether these can be integrated, whether the management can be integrated better, and I think it can be, but it will take some adjustments at the policy level.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Renmar. And Sarla, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, Sarla, there's a question from Dr. Dayanandan. There is a conflicting demand between short-term higher income and higher income oriented activities and long-term food security. Some of the locally cultivated indigenous crop varieties harboring high genetic diversity may not necessarily be high yielding, but have resistance for a variety of stresses contributing to long-term food security. However, however, farmers may choose high yielding agronomically improved varieties due to their potential for immediate income benefits. What are the approaches through this mission to promote the balance between these conflicting demands? You have pointed out in your talk, but that is one of the questions that is asked.
That's to the mission, I think. But yes, I think that is one of the biggest challenges also that we have faced.
Yeah.
Realizing that we've lost many of our traditional crops, heirloom crops, because there's a lot of these high yielding people are going, and it's understandable, as it is, land is so small and income is very little, and that's all that they have as an asset to earn an income. But we were thinking if we could link it with some kind of agro enterprises. So there's a lot of demand now for in the markets locally also for example, say millets, or even the naked barley that we have, or buckwheat. So, not converting entire farm, your entire farm into some traditional crop farm, but also, linking with this demand as a group, as an agro enterprise. So we are trying to explore whether this is possible with also some of our traditional crops like millet or buckwheat, because there is a demand, but do it as an agri enterprise. So I think we've been having a lot of talk with NABARD, who are really interested to actually fund if we come in an institutional level, like a farmer producer organization, because household level and all the scale is too small. So I think to even have a scale as an enterprise, we have to go integratedly, not only just the traditional crop, but mix it with honey and maybe mustard and other agri products. So that's the approach we've been trying to take over here.
Yeah, thank you, Sarla. And since we are running out of time, I will close now, and the other questions will be answered offline. The Biodiversity Collaborative will reply to each of your questions by email. While concluding, I would like to thank all the panelists for giving their valuable time and also sharing their experiences and their knowledge. I would like to also announce at this point of time that next week we have 3 webinars. One webinar on zoonotic diseases is going to be on biodiversity and health, One Health and zoonosis in vulnerable communities in India. This will be live on Monday at 4 p.m. And on Friday next week, we have another webinar on biodiversity and ecosystem services. Some of the questions were also related to ecosystem services, and this webinar will answer some of those questions related to ecosystem services. And the topic is on how biodiversity ecosystem services, understanding, restoring, and conserving biodiversity to ensure our future. And on Saturday, we also have another webinar at 4 p.m. on biodiversity and health, valorizing medicinal plants and traditional knowledge for the 21st century. So there are these 3 webinars coming up next week. And we thank all the speakers, the panelists, as well as all the attendees in this webinar. And for further information, please write to us at contact@biodiversitycollaborative.org. And finally, I would like to also acknowledge the support we have received from the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India for conducting these webinars. I request everyone to follow the Biodiversity Collaborative on social media, and you will get updates, all the updates related to the mission. And thank you everyone again, and looking forward to meeting all of you on Monday at 4 p.m. for the webinar on zoonotic diseases. Thank you.
Thank you
so much
for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all the panelists.
Thank you all the audience.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.